Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Token Bytes with Finstep Asia. Today with us is a very interesting guest, Danny Levy, who is the Managing Director for APAC with Money 2020. He has been in the industry for quite some time, a thought leader, a fellow podcast host, but more importantly, somebody who has a very deep insights on how fintech has been growing in the region and globally, plus looking at how thought leadership has developed over time. Danny, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing today?
Hey, Musheer. No, I'm very good. Thank you for having me on the podcast. Thank you for the opportunity. And was enjoying the back and forth conversations about the fintech community and what you've been up to in Hong Kong. So yeah, really looking forward to the conversation.
Likewise, look, it's been a lot happening around the world. COVID was a catalyst for fintech growing, and at times I say fintech is dead, but I would love to understand more about your journey that you've had and how your career's grown in this world of thought leadership and events.
Sure. So I've been in Singapore for the last 15 years. Prior to that, I was working in London. I think if you ask most people working in the kind of B2B events industry, it's not really a career that you're aware of when you're studying or where you think you might end up. And so I did history and journalism in London, Queen Mary and City University. And really coming out of university, I think when you've got kind of a history degree, you're not always sure what you want to do. And sure. I saw a posting actually about defense and security editorial and producer for a company there. And I'd done military history at university. So I went for the interview. I thought it sounded interesting. I thought, I'll do this for 6 months or so. And then maybe I'll keep my options open and do something else. But I got the role, and yeah, I find it really fascinating. So the first project I ever worked on back when I was about 21 years old was on unmanned aerial drones. So, wow. And the nice thing about, I guess, the B2B events world is that you have to get very good and be comfortable with being a generalist. So because you work across a lot of different industries, especially earlier in your career, I guess now it's really focused on fintech and financial services, but earlier in your career, you're moving across different industries quite quickly. And when you're very young, you're then talking to 5-star generals, really senior people, to really get to grips with topics very quickly, so you can write conference programs and secure really senior people. So that job was great, and I got to travel a lot, right, around Europe. So lots of business trips, meeting people face to face. Taught me a lot about sales, getting on the phone, being really confident. And when you're in your early 20s, that can be quite daunting, right? When you're put in positions where you've got people on the other side of the phone or in a meeting room that have got decades of experience to talk to. So was there for a few years, and then one day I had the opportunity with that company to move to Singapore. So they opened an office in Singapore. And yeah, I think when you're young, you should seize opportunities with both hands when they come up. And I'd always wanted to work in a new country, a new environment. So I moved to Singapore in 2010, and I set up that office here. So I was 24 years old, general manager of that office. And I ran that business for a year or so. And then we ran an event in Singapore on chem bio consulting and defense, and it did really well. And I got to know a company that did CBRN research and consulting. So I did that for a year or two, and I set that company up in Singapore. So that was like I always think of that as my mini MBA, where you're running your own business and you're plugging in the computers and you're doing the invoicing yourself and you're traveling around the region and, really doing absolutely everything from changing the toilet roll to going out and closing large deals. Yeah. So that was a really good experience. And then I joined a UK events business called Worldwide Business Research. And the team was extremely small, and we kind of relaunched their portfolio. So they do large scale events in areas like e-commerce for retail and capital markets for equities and fixed income trading. Grew that team to around 70 people.
Okay.
Got the team. We got through the pandemic and we diversified the business and we launched into lots of new markets across Asia. So that was a great experience, and the company was very successful. And then really, yeah, Money 2020 approached me in the middle of 2022, I think it was, that they were coming back to Asia. And it seemed
Yeah.
like a fantastic opportunity to kind of be in, right at the early stages, build the team from the ground up. And, I guess we can get into it, but there's very few events in the industry that have the same kind of magic as Money 2020. And,
Right.
a lot of events play from the same playbook. And I thought it was just such a good, unique opportunity in a public company. So yeah, really, really took that opportunity, and we relaunched the Asia show in Bangkok last year. So we had over 3,000 attendees, paid attendees, which is the difference for the show. About 127 sponsors, over 87 countries came to the show. So really successful return to Asia. And then yeah, it's coming up again in April this year. So really exciting times.
And looking forward to it. It's going to be, I'm going to be there, and the lineup looks great. I want to come
Yes,
back.
you've always got to raise the bar, right, year on year.
Yeah, once you set the standard, right? It's a
Yeah.
being in the top 10 in the world or top 5 in the world as an athlete, and then you have to constantly be up there. Or if you're a football team like my team, Manchester United, then it becomes a challenge to keep up there. But side note,
It does. Well, everything comes in waves, right? I'm sure they'll be back up there again very soon.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit more about that experience you had, right? So my journey, in a sense, some of it is similar. Started off in this firm, which was a global firm, but we were young and we were given responsibility, and you learn so much when you are given that responsibility, I feel, at a young age. But then I also went over to Mauritius to build the company's branch from a standing start. There were a few people, but grew it to 30, 35 traders. And as you said, almost doing a lot of the end-to-end tasks along with my operations manager. But what was that experience in terms of being a young person and having to deal with, as you mentioned, those not only people with decades of experience, but people in power and authority, right? You're talking about and hugely subject matter experts, and we're going to talk to them about something that they've lived and breathed for the last 20, 30 years. How did you cope with that? What were some of the challenges you found, and how did you overcome that? Just as I think it's a good experience learning. Tap into that. Yeah.
I think early on in my career, sometimes there were times where I felt a little bit out of my depth, right? I mean, that's just normal, right? When you're doing these things, because everything in life gets easier once you've actually gone through the experience. And we learn through repetition, don't we, in doing things. Right. And that, I think that's also a risk, though, right? That's because why we also sometimes get stuck in our comfort zones.
Yeah.
Especially as you get older, because you feel like you don't want to change and you know something so well. So you've always got to remind yourself to step out of that comfort zone and actually almost have that kind of white belt beginner mindset regularly. Sure. It's not a bad thing to actually be a beginner. I think that's what I've probably learned over the years. And especially when I used to be more involved in the actual kind of research and editorial side, one thing I learned when you were changing industry. So I would sometimes go from working in the kind of retail industry, and you would move that into kind of equities trading, capital markets. And if you've ever worked in that finance industry, they love acronym soup. So you'd be on a call with someone and they'd be throwing acronyms at you like MiFID II and all these regulations and Dodd-Frank. And, if you're new into it, that can be quite overwhelming. But I think normally any reasonable person, if you just set expectations and you say, do you know what, I'm actually quite new into this industry. I'm not an expert like yourself. And so maybe some of the questions I ask you today might seem a little bit simple or crude, but it would just help me really frame the conversation and make sure I've got it right from my own perspective. 9 times out of 10, people are going to be very accepting when you do that. And the other thing I always found as well is, it's helped me because I have my own podcast, but I've done sales for a long time and I started an editorial. The other thing is that when you are talking to someone, don't just take what they say for the first time. If you ask a question as like the gospel and move on to the next question, most of the time, the actual really good detail in a conversation or in a meeting or when you're talking to a colleague is in the follow-up questions, right? And you're
Right.
asking them to go into a lot more depth to really get to the core. And they can be simple follow-ups like, what did you mean by that? Or how did that make you feel? Simple things like that. But then you're actually going to have a good conversation. Nowadays, I think sometimes there's a bit of a tick box in terms of just going through the motions. So, be any industry, right? If you're curious, I think you probably give yourself half a decent chance to get up to speed quicker than if you're just taking things at face value. And at the same time, be grateful if you've got people around you that will give you that constructive feedback, because again, early in your career or any stage in your career really, but you are going to miss things and no one's an island. So hopefully there's people that care about you enough that will give you that constructive feedback. And when you do get it, make sure you act on it, right? Don't feel bad about it or, oh, they're criticizing me. If it's done in a constructive way, make sure you act on it. But yeah, I think you just got to be resilient, to answer your question. If you're early in your career and you haven't gone through things before, you're probably going to face a lot of setbacks and challenges. And it's just about how you kind of take that on board, learn from it, and move on very quickly.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a lot like a journey, right? It's almost like doing a marathon or a run, and you can't expect everything to be at the same pace right throughout, and everything to be hunky dory, flat track. It's cross country.
I think any business, it's going to be hard, right?
Yeah.
You're going to have hard moments. I mean, I remember when I was running WBR, we just had our best financial year in 2019. And we were looking to expand into the Middle East. And I went to Dubai in January 2020. And, everything was going really well. And then the health pandemic hit.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, who would have
Yeah.
seen that coming? And, events were grounded for the best part of 2 to 3 years, right? I mean, you had to have some pretty thick skin and resilience to get through that. And by that point, I thought very naively that I'd overcome every challenge possible to get the business to where it was at. And all of a sudden, there was something you could have never seen coming. So, you do have to take it sometimes day by day, month by month, and not get too overexcited when things are going well.
That's actually a good segue into talking about Money 2020 and Asia in particular. You took up the role right at the end of let's say normalization of things during the pandemic 2022, and then launched in 2023. So it wasn't like everything was hunky-dory, finished. It was still newer variants coming up, but there were ways of coping with it. And you were then picking up on a business which had, as you said, over 2-3 years not been feasible, at least in this part of the world.
That's right.
Yeah. So what was the thinking behind you wanting to take this up? And then we'll talk about Money 2020 right after that.
Sure.
What attracted you to the role and how's that progressed so far?
Yeah. So, like I mentioned, so I was with WBR for about 10 years. Really happy there. Very good business, great events, very good culture, strong focus on mental health, work-life balance. But the thing when I got approached by Money 2020, I wasn't looking for a new role. As I said, the one thing that struck me was that I had no interest really in making a sideways move to another similar company with the same business model. It was just through the conversations, I very quickly understood that Money 2020 does things extremely differently and has a very different lens on what an event is or what a show is, right? And how your attendees should experience that. And, just little things like internally, they have a whole creative division and team where all they do every day is they wake up every day and they think about, what's the amazing activation or amazing experience, or how can I design a stage or, at the entrance to the show, to make the attendee and the sponsor feel like a rock star or really have that kind of wow factor. That is so rare, right? That companies would have that investment. And, I can talk about many other things as well, but, just the entire makeup of the show really, really interested me. I think the opportunity to build a team from the ground up, that's very unique. And don't forget, Money 2020's got a big, powerful global brand as well. I think when you're coming into Asia in particular, or any new market, if you're launching something new from scratch that nobody's heard about, it's going to be a lot harder than bringing in an established brand
True.
that has a great global reputation. So that played into it as well. And then I think overall just meeting the team and public company. So I'd never worked in a public company at that point. It'd always been private businesses.
Sure.
So I thought that would be a great experience. And I think lastly, WBR, great business, worldwide business research. I also kind of felt like I've been there 10 years and I'd achieved what I needed to achieve, right? I built it up, very stable, making good profit. I got it through the pandemic. And I think it was
Mhm.
just time to go on and do that next challenge. And, I always would have very fond memories of WBR and, still have friends there. And, it's the right way to leave a business. So sometimes it's good to leave on a high type thing. And I felt it was just the kind of right moment, the stars had aligned in that way.
Fair. I mean, that's
Yeah,
exciting. Right? You have newer experiences. You spend a decade in a company in modern times is a long time.
it
To
is. Yeah.
if I may use the term. Now, it's probably a good time to also understand for our audience who may have not attended a Money 2020 event,
Mm,
and also for there are two parts to it, as you said. When you're building a business from scratch, it has its own challenges. When you're building or launching a well-known business from one part of the world into the other part of the world, it comes with expectations, right? And
it
Money
does. Yeah.
2020 has been at the forefront and leading fintech event globally, especially with Vegas as well as Amsterdam. So, how did you approach taking that up, and what has been the focus for Money 2020? And tell us a little bit more about how Bangkok went last year.
Yeah, so I think what is really important is, like I mentioned, it's Money 2020, it's this big, powerful global brand, right? A lot of people know about it, but many in Asia, especially when, I started January 2023, we brought the show back in April 24. But,
Mm-hmm.
from some of the initial conversations, there were many people that had never heard of Money 2020 in Asia. So there, you've got a big brand, you're still having to kind of talk about your value proposition and your place in the world. And let's not
Sure.
forget, right, Asia is very competitive when it comes to kind of fintech events, right? You've got quite a few incumbents in region. So you've got to be very clear on what your unique value proposition is in that sense. And also, you don't just want to drop the Las Vegas edition of Money 2020 into Asia. You
Yeah.
do need to localize the product offering, right? You do need to have your regional audience in mind, whether that's more kind of like local nuances or language, cultural differences, or how people would experience the show from a kind of travel and, interacting with the parties kind of perspective. It's quite different, right? There's different
Yeah.
nuances. So you've got to think about those lenses. So we went about, we did regionalize the product. And a big focus for us was making sure that the show really was Asia for Asia. So, making
Okay.
sure we had kind of Asia and kind of advisors and, the research was very Asia focused. But ultimately, we wanted to deliver an audience that was made up of 70% of Asia headquartered businesses on site. Because again, when you're
Okay.
a global brand, it's easy to lean too much on your global customers. And
Sure.
then when you have kind of international sponsors or regional sponsors that come, although they're having lots of conversations, they may feel that, well, I'm meeting international businesses that I could meet at the other shows. Why am I coming to Asia? I want to meet with Asian customers. So, it sounds simple, but it has to be a kind of a big focus. And we ended up delivering over kind of 78% of Asia headquartered companies at the show
Okay.
last year, which was a great
Wow.
result. And I guess kind of your question around Money 2020 itself. So the show's been around for over a decade. It was launched originally in the US. And I think most great events are actually not normally launched by event professionals. They're normally launched by people in the industry that kind of identify a problem. And what the
Mm-hmm.
problem was really was kind of off the back of the financial crisis in 2008. Um, when kind of fintech was just kind of starting to go mainstream, there was no real kind of one place where the whole ecosystem could come together. So there were events for kind of banking, or there were events for startups, or events for VCs, but nothing that brought everyone together. And that's really kind of how Money 2020 was born.
Sure.
So it was born to bring the whole industry together. The business was acquired by our kind of previous parent company, Essential. And then they took the event into Europe, into Copenhagen, and then Amsterdam, where it is now. We brought the event to Asia in Singapore in 2018 and 19. The pandemic put a halt to that, and then we brought it back later, like last year. And then, just last year we were acquired again by a company called Informa. So a larger public company. So that's really exciting as well. And what makes the show really special is that it's a ticketed event. So it's not just around the kind of sponsor experience. We really focus on how, as I mentioned, the delegate experience is the show. So from the kind of cutting edge content that's on the stages, where we do call for content. So speakers apply to speak and everyone gets on the stage on merit. We don't sell speaking slots. So there's no, from an attendee, when you go to most shows, you feel like you're being marketed to. That's never the case with Money 2020. And the other interesting thing is we don't repeat speakers year on year. So Money 2020 Asia has around 300 speakers and no repeat speakers at the event. And the content NPS that we got for our Asia show is actually the highest globally last year. Each stage that we have at the event has a unique identity. So the editorial and creative team partner on it. So at the Asia show this year, we have our exchange stage, which is our main stage, which has bamboo shoots all the way around it. It has DJ deck. It's really impactful. There's a news anchor station for something new that we're going to be doing this year. So like live reporting from the show floor. We have an AI stage where we've built our own large language model called Ayana that's going to co-host the stage with Money 2020 editorial team. We have a stage called Unfiltered where you have to put your phone in a pouch and there's no press. And we've turned this stage around so we can have interactive content and facilitated networking, which is really hard to do at events of this size. So this stage is fully enclosed because you want to learn from all the great minds at the show, sometimes not just the speakers. And this allows you to do that. And lastly, we've built a brand new area. So we have our global Money Pot podcast. We've actually built a whole integrated space on the show floor around this, where we've got our podcast studio, we've got our stage, and we'll have some of our partners, the likes of Fireblocks and Ripple and Circle, that will be in this area, and they'll take over the stage for an hour in terms of co-curated content. And then we've got a networking bar as well, so they can do networking meetupping, and then there's meeting rooms behind, so the sponsor can really utilize this full space. And then there's fun creative elements in this area as well. So we have an AR photo booth with our beekeeper. So when you take the photo, it kind of comes to life with the beekeeper and the honey. So it's really good fun. There's a massage space on the show floor, so you can unwind, get a massage. It's about wellness, get a juice, feel good. And then right at the heart of the show, you saw it, is our kind of meetings and connections lounge. Because ultimately, we do all of this stuff to educate people, give them insight, make sure they're having a good time, but that drives all the business at the show. And because it is ticketed, 70% of the audience is C-suite, you can get a lot of business done whilst you're kind of interacting with all of these different touch points at the show. And then super, super good parties and industry nights in the evening. We're known for our parties. So this year we've got something new at a venue called M-Sphere Tribe. So it's a rooftop bar, but it's enclosed. It's got a pool. It's got projection mapped headset. We're taking over the bar. It fits over 1,000 people. So we're super excited about that. So the show is just really unique, right? There is just nothing else like it in the market, to be honest. And you do need to attend it. I was talking to someone the other day. I think it shows my age, though. I was told by a younger colleague, but they described Money 2020 as like the Ministry of Sound in terms of events.
Maybe quite apt. I mean, look, it's experiential, if I'm using that term.
Experiential,
right?
That's right.
not just coming and listening in and maybe meeting a few people, hard sales, and go away. And Bangkok as a city has tremendous entertainment venues, right? The tribe that you
Does, yeah.
mentioned, B2M Square, it's a very unique-ish mall. You know, it's exciting to be in that mall, and their bars, etc., very different, right? Albeit at 35 degrees and humid, but it still appeals to you. And I like the fact, like, you know, a lot of the things you spoke about. I was hosting a couple of pods on the Money Pod last year. That was a different experience. Speaking live, people being all around, it's right in the middle. Plus, you then had that interaction, as you mentioned, about unfiltered. I think that was a good, was very well received because you do want to have some of those Chatham House rule conversations where you can get more to the meat of it and interactive, almost like roundtables, but at a slightly larger scale. So yeah, it looks quite exciting. A lot of unique elements to it. And for me as an attendee last year, the big point was the quality of C-suite that was there, right? So the conversations were quite different. And that was the general feedback I was getting from everybody else who had attended, was that is a very impactful element. You can have a large numbers, etc. That works, yes, but from a B2B perspective in particular, you do want to make sure you have those right conversations with the right people, because it cuts through a lot of the effort and then it makes it worthwhile.
One attendee said to me last year, when he was describing the show, he said, sometimes other events feel like crowded commuter trains, but Money 2020 Asia feels like a premium bullet train. So, you know, that I guess you get that time with people, as you mentioned, right? Because people are quite generous when it is a very senior show, and you don't feel as rushed off your feet. You know, more likely to stay and have the kind of in-depth quality meetings and conversations.
Correct. And, you know, Money 2020 also does quite often thought leadership. You've just had a report come out on fintech in Asia and beyond. What are some of the key insights and thought takeaways from there? You know, the audience would love to know what they can what's been happening and what they can expect in fintech in the coming year.
Yeah, I mean, the report basically was a reflection of all of the research that we did, you know, to help us frame the show and come up with the different content topics at the event. But what often happens is that you do all of that research and you use it for the program, but then, you know, you don't really utilize it. So what we did this year was we took all of that first party research and we turned it into kind of our FinTech Insights report for Asia Pacific.
Sure.
And I guess we're seeing a few trends across kind of Asia. I guess the first that we're seeing is the kind of real-time payment systems. So it's the likes of UPI in India and Prompt Pay in Thailand. You know, we're really seeing that these are setting kind of new standards for speed, efficiency, and adoption. And these platforms, they're really kind of transforming both domestic and cross-border transactions, and they make payments so seamless now for consumers. Very invisible, right? So I mean, if you're on DBS Bank and you're in Thailand, right, you can pay through your Paylar QR code when you're in Thailand itself, and obviously UPI is huge now, right? In India, it's really impressive. So, you know, we're seeing that continue, and kind of the collaboration across different countries as well, as that kind of cross-border payments picks up even more. Clearly growing interest in stable coins and central bank digital currencies. So again, remittance and cross-border payments in these areas. And we're seeing that these transactions kind of are just getting better and better in terms of speed, reducing costs, addressing currency volatility, and, you know, China and Singapore really leading the way in terms of CBDC experimentation. Digital banks. So again, digital banks don't always have an easy time of it, I guess, right? Sometimes in terms of competing with incumbents in certain markets. There's obviously standouts, right, with Kakao in Korea doing quite well, but profitability remains a challenge, right, for most. So we see that kind of these banks are focused on streamlining operations and expanding their product offerings to retain and grow their customer base. So I mean, that's another kind of trend that we saw coming out of the report. Financial inclusion, you know, really important still in Asia. social impact, and we see that that's kind of outperforming traditional banks in terms of reaching underserved markets. So many are creating innovative solutions, and these are kind of tailored to low-income populations and advancing social good and bridging access gaps. What else do we see out of the report? I think fintechs and traditional finance institutions, they're kind of partnering and working together, combining innovation and stability. And we see that, these partnerships remain and are really critical for scaling solutions like embedded finance and regulatory compliance across the region. And then I think lastly, I would just say that we do see governments across Asia developing really kind of fintech friendly policies that encourage innovation. But they've got to still ensure consumer protection, right? And make sure that there's sustainable growth in payments, banking, and digital assets. I could go on, but I think that's probably enough.
Now, for the audience, it's a very insightful report. We'll include the link in the podcast details, so description. Do look into it. But that was very, very useful. I think there's a holistic positive trend across Asia, although categorizing Asia as one market can be a folly. Different countries are running at different paces with different regulations, different sizes. And you do see that there is some sort of harmonization that we're reaching in terms of certain elements. Like you mentioned, the faster payment systems, there's more and more harmonization on that. Now it's going into border connectivity for faster payment systems. There's more harmonization when it comes to broader digital banking, and elements of at least making existing banks more digital, right? So that's the other trend that's happening in jurisdictions where they don't have a digital banking license or don't want to have one. I think those are key. And of course, blockchainification of banking is happening, not just necessarily just crypto and digital assets, but use of blockchain across. But yeah, this has been very... I think
we didn't mention it as well, right? But obviously it's on the tip of everyone's tongue, but clearly also aggressive adoption of AI technologies for fraud detection and customer personalization and operational efficiency. And I think open banking, digital lending, sustainability, and ESG are the kind of big areas. So I mean, there's a lot of content in our report. So if you're interested, I would just kind of suggest people to have a trip to the Money 2020 Asia website, and you can download the APAC Insights report from there.
Sounds perfect. Danny, look, this has been great conversation. Learned a lot about your journey. It's not a typical journey that people may look at, but it's also something that shows how you can move from one industry to another, potentially different. It's about your skill sets that you build that can be very applied in different worlds as well, right? Plus, of course, very excited to come back to Money 2020 Thailand this year, and seeing all the newer booths, and the AI stage is quite exciting to see how that comes through, right?
There's some exciting announcements as well happening in the next kind of 6-7 weeks as well as we lead into show, which I'm not allowed to talk about at the moment, but that will also elevate it from last year. So stay tuned, I would say. But really excited to have you there as well.
We're looking forward to it. And thanks once again.